Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Riddick, starring Vin Diesel, Jordi Mola, Matt Nable, Katie Sackhoff, Bokeem Woodbine, Dave Bautista, and Carl Urban as Vaco, directed by David Toohey. Now, I remember going to the IMAX showing of this in theaters a decade ago, I'll say, and I don't remember too much about it as until I watched it for this viewing. I have seen it a few times in my life, once in theaters, a couple times on Blu-ray, but will it stand up all these years later? Let's get into it and find out. We open 5 years after the Chronicles of Riddick, and Riddick, returned by Vin Diesel, became the Lord Marshal, and it hasn't been easy for Commander Vaco, returned briefly by Carl Urban, as he makes a deal with Riddick, and that is taking him to his home planet Furia by a ship, and Vaco can become the next Lord Marshal, and the guy with the fucked up face, which is what Riddick calls Crone, who's Vaco's assistant, and Riddick, when he gets to a deserted planet that I believe was in Pitch Black, realizing this isn't Furia, and Crone tries to assassinate Riddick, but doesn't, as Riddick is left buried, which makes sense to place this time 5 years after the worst movie in the series, in my opinion. Riddick is stuck on the deserted planet and breaks his leg while being hunted by mud demons from Pitch Black, as there's creatures that look like dogs, while others look like scorpions. And Riddick fights them off while he's vulnerable, and I like the fact that at times Riddick can be vulnerable, and that's a new thing I learned from Riddick as a character, as I like this more than Pitch Black and the Chronicles of Riddick, in my opinion, as it shows in the unrated version more than the theatrical cut. In the Chronicles of Riddick, we didn't know him at much, but we kind of get to know him in Pitch Black, but this tells me a better idea of Riddick as a character more than those two films did. Riddick finds a mud demon that sounds like a puppy and treats it like one, and I like this creature as I think he's adorable, and a podcast I listened to has reviewed this before and called it Stanley's, and that's what I'm going to name him for the rest of the movie at this point, which is Stanley. And Riddick and Stanley get cured by a snake's venom and heal quite quickly, as Riddick goes hunting without Stanley and catches some food, and I like the effects as they look good but not great. And in the unrated version we see a little bit of space, which actually looks just as bad as it was in Pitch Black. And they couldn't fix the goddamn outer space sequence, as that was a step down, but we're on land and it looks better than outer space in my opinion. Let's just look at the next film whenever that comes out. It's supposed to can fix that shit. Riddick saves Stanley as well as his own life, as Stanley is like the cutest puppy dog of a mud demon, and he is, and we move on to years later, as Stanley is a full-grown dog, while Riddick works on surviving the planet until they find a workshop of some kind where bounty hunters take a living in, while Riddick finds food for himself and Stanley, and one of the food he gives to Stanley, and he pisses on it, which was pretty funny, and I thought, oh, that's Stanley. While rain comes in from a distance, and Riddick exposes himself in the workshop, and a ship comes in as we meet Santana, played by Jordi Mola, as I recognized him as the bad guy in Bad Boys 2, unfortunately. And we get a couple of guys led by him in Diaz, played by Dave Bautista, before he was ever in Guardians of the Galaxy and more movies as a star. And one of his crewmates wakes up a woman who happens to be the prisoner of Santana, and he uses her as bait for Riddick. And if he doesn't show up, then she gets shot and killed by Santana. And this guy is such an asshole, but the actor does a good job at making it that way. But I didn't mind him as a character. But I like Diaz more than him, in my opinion. Another ship led by Boss Johns, played by Matt Nable, as he's the father of Johns, as that will be revealed a little later, but I'm saying it now, from Pitch Black. As I'm as hopefully I'll talk about him again whenever I get to Hacksaw Ridge and his crew members Dahl, played by Katie Sackhoff from Battlestar Galactica, and Moss, played by Bokeem Woodbine, whom I reviewed quite a few times in the remake of Total Recall, as well as Spider-Man Homecoming, Spencer Confidential, and Ghostbusters Afterlife. And out of any of those characters, as I do like them, I like Doll the most because she's a badass as she doesn't fuck guys. She gets paid to fuck them up every once in a while, which is the best line in the whole movie in my opinion. Diaz almost kills Stanley until Stanley makes a robot act funny and Santana unplugs the robot, while Boss Johns gets on his quite a fucking bit, as he tells Santana something about traps and how he should have swept the area as one of Santana's goons gets killed by a trap. And another one gets caught in one as Santana loses men quickly, and these motherfuckers are working for Santana are stupid as shit. Particularly when they get killed off rather quickly while daytime comes and have a funeral for the two men who got killed, and Santana talks with Boss Johns while Dahl punches the shit out of Santana, and Boss John says he will take command and continues to punch. He will take command, and he takes orders from Dahl and continues to get punched in the face by her, which was hilarious as the plot is much better told here than in the first two movies, but the acting is fine at best, but it wasn't the greatest in my opinion. Dahl shoots Stanley a couple of times and puts the tracking device of some kind in his back leg, and Boss Johns and Moss, as well as another guy, go in a cave to find Riddick, but instead bump into Santana's men and kills him, while Riddick is watching Dahl taking a shower, which felt pretty damn creepy, as this was the most uncomfortable scene for nudity's sakes, as Riddick will say something later in the film that will make me super uncomfortable, but I'll get there when I get there. But this is one of the two scenes that made me pretty uncomfortable while Riddick hangs out on the top of the workshop for bounty hunters, and Santana almost sees Riddick, but Dahl comes in and once again beats his ass up, while Boss Johns and his crew gets back to base, and they find writing in blood that says fair trade, and while they talk about the way to go after Riddick, next scene you know, Moss bumps into Riddick and doesn't kill him, as he asks if any of them are afraid of him, and he sort of freaks out, but the lines in that scene is cheesy as hell. Riddick goes back to his hiding spot, and Stanley tells them they're outside, and Riddick chats with them, and Johns and Santana and Diaz go to him as Riddick approaches while Dahl has a sniper points the gun at Riddick, and he tries to make a deal to deal with them for a ship that will last until the rain comes, and Riddick calls Santana Box Boy, and Stanley attacks Santana, and Santana kills Stanley, while Dahl puts some device on Riddick to shock him, and I was sad when Stanley got killed by Santana, but Riddick is knocked out by Johns and wakes up in a trap, and I felt so bad for Stanley, as I wish he survived the whole movie, but what am I to judge? So that scene was effective. While I was engaged by the action in this scene, Riddick predicts he's going to put a Santana's head in the box, and he brought for him, specifically for Riddick, Santana brought a box for Riddick, with Santana's sword, while Riddick brings up something about Dahl's toenails as it matches her body parts. Let's say as it made me very uncomfortable when that subject was brought up, and Johns asks about his son, and the rain comes and kills Santana in 5 seconds, which was rather a clever way to kill the bastard. The robot spots some dangerous mud demons, and the crew happens to see them, and after Santana's death, and Riddick helps them out and predicts what's going to happen to them, and Diaz says, "Yeah, let's cut him loose," which made me laugh as that was corny. They get out with Riddick by their side and prepares their ships, and one of the soldiers, Vargas, gets poisoned and dies, while Boss Johns doesn't give any weapons to Riddick, as he rides off on something like a flying motorcycle. And he and Diaz and Johns ride off and get attacked by some mud demons, while Diaz acts like a dickhole by knocking Boss Johns off his motorcycle, and John shoots some mud demons, and Riddick comes to his rescue and makes Boss John sit in the back of. They ride with each other, and the rest of the way, and Diaz thinks about killing Riddick, while he confesses what happened to his son, as he was a junkie and wanting to kill a kid to save his own ass. And Boss Johns gets knocked out by Diaz, and Diaz fights Riddick to the death as Riddick cuts his arm, and it kills Diaz. And Riddick says the blade was meant for anyone who deserved it, as he tells Boss Johns Diaz was going to ghost him, like Boss Johns said that he did in the first movie. And Riddick fights off some mud demons with Johns by working together and Riddick saves Boss Johns' ass, while more mud demons come and get them, and Riddick was stabbed as he falls down and is vulnerable once again. It makes the mud demons go after him while Boss Johns gets his ship, while they fly their own, and Riddick is almost dead by the mud demons until Boss Johns and other members of his crew rescue him, and he gets his own ship and flies to Furia like he wanted to from the beginning of the movie. And the climax was convincing, as this was much better told than in Pitch Black and the Chronicles of Riddick. As the story was, I had a fun, entertaining time with this one. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 6.0 out of 10. This movie tells a much better story and has better characters than in Pitch Black and the Chronicles of Riddick, as I like these characters much better than those two films. And I found them than in those two films, while I found the Mud Demon's dog Stanley quite adorable, and the special effects look good, but not great, as they're not Oscar winners, not by a long shot. The plot is much better told in here, and the action scenes engaged me in a way that I was kind of having a little fun with it, as it was much scarier than the Chronicles of Riddick, and the acting is fine at best, but again, it's not the greatest in my opinion, as there were times it got pretty cheesy. This is the most entertained I have been with any of the 3 movies in the series, in my opinion. And as this is the best of the 3 movies, as this is a recommendation if you want to watch a movie and have fun with a movie like this, have a good time with this one. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and until Vin Diesel decides to make Riddick, which I don't know when that'll be, until then, you're not afraid of the dark, are you?